Why do we still have a cover-up?
There's a couple of reasons. One is because people want it that way. If they didn't want it that way, it would be different. But why they want it that way, they may not even be aware of. And I found that there's three things that keep people from understanding what happened. Number one is poor problem-solving skills. They tend to guess at the answer and then work backwards and cherry-pick data to support the answer. Number two is groupthink. People feel safer following their peers, so peer pressure can control people's thoughts and, public opinion. And the third thing is they can't handle the implications. They wish it weren't true, so they'd rather deceive themselves. It may or may not be conscious. So those three things, keep things from going forward. And if it's too horrible of an outcome, people easily look for something else and also run with the herd. It is a survival instinct. You think of a big field full of deer, one gets spooked and they all go running. Only one of them knows why they're running.
Ambulance parked on West Street is barely damaged. WTC-7 was destroyed at 5:20 p.m. on 9/11. This tells us it is before 5:20 p.m. on 9/11, before the cleanup operation had begun. The northwest corner of the lobby of WTC-1 is visible, as well as the intact core of WTC-1, which includes stairwell B. WTC-6 is visible, and it was 8 stories tall and was much higher than most of the debris. There is also a tree that is still mostly intact.
You first need to start out with what happened. That's the key. You first have to establish what happened before you can determine how it happened, before you can determine who did it or why they did it. But what did we hear on 9/11? They hate us for our freedoms. Bin Laden did it. And he did it with instructing people to fly airplanes into the buildings. But what happened? That was never discussed. We were told how it happened, who did it, why they did it, but we weren't given the information to determine what actually happened. And if you don't first understand what your problem statement is, what problem are you solving? If you don't know what happened, and you immediately start with how it happened, who did it, or what did it, you have to assume the what part of it. You have to assume what happened. So you're solving an imaginary problem, not a real problem. Because you have to imagine what it was that happened. Who did it? What's it that got done? And that is a really key feature. And, few people realize that. That's what forensic science is about, is first looking at what happened. You don't need a theory to determine what happened. If the evidence doesn't tell you, then you aren't determining what happened.
The Twin Towers were colossal structures. This ambulance parked on West Street is not crushed, buried, or incinerated. Exterior aluminum cladding, not steel, is in front of the ambulance. There's more aluminum cladding beside the ambulance, and there's dust and unburnt paper everywhere. The straight outer columns are not crushed, buried, or pulverized. core columns are not crushed, bent, melted, pulverized, or buried. The intact remains of the WTC-1 core is visible and is higher than the rubble pile. No rubble landed here above the core, and the rubble pile was no higher than the lobby. The massive WTC-1 tower left a tiny rubble pile no higher than the lobby, and somehow no rubble landed on top of the intact remains of the core.
But 9/11 was an attack on human consciousness. It was a form of trauma-based mind control. And you think of children, you have trauma and they end up with a split personality of a type of schizophrenia to avoid having to deal with that very unpleasantness. What was 9/11? People compartmentalize that. And so they have their regular life, but then the 9/11 stuff, it's a trigger that triggers aggression. And I understand you had a guest on recently, Neil Sanders, who said it very well about,
That's right.
Like, let's grab the pitchforks and let's go get them. We got to go get somebody. And I saw that on 9/11. That's what really upset me about the most is when I went into campus, I started out at home figuring stuff out. Then I went into campus, walked up the stairs, and there's these two faculty members saying, we got to go take them out. We got to take them all out. They were already with their pitchfork in hand, ready to go get the witch on their witch hunt. And that was scary. Like, before they even know what happened, they're just, they're given like the scent of a rag for a bloodhound and go get them, go sick them.
Within 45 seconds of the second hit at the World Trade Center, the Fox News anchor solved 9/11.
There was a pilot who flew. There was another one. We just saw another one. We just saw another one apparently go. Another plane just flew into the second tower. This has to be deliberate, folks.
Well, that would begin to say that, yeah.
We just saw on live television as a second plane flew into the second tower of the World Trade Center. Now, given what has been going on around the world, some of the key suspects come to mind: Osama bin Laden.
And then we just heard OBL.
Osama bin Laden.
What's a bin Laden?
Osama bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden.
The government has never even tried to prove it's a OBL story. It's a fiction.
He is always poised to strike again. Immensely wealthy man and a very private man. He has been granted a safe haven by Afghanistan's ruling Taliban movement. And during his time in hiding, he has called for a holy war against the United States and specifically for the killing of Americans and Jews.
But that's the issue that I'm seeing a lot lately. We are leaving our thinking to someone else. In this case, to the media and the government. It wasn't even hours after that event happened, and already the media was using the name Osama bin Laden. And of course, everybody they had a blood in their mouths, if you will, and they wanted the government to do the thinking for us. Oh, if they're saying Osama bin Laden, let's go get him, without using critical thinking. And I was mentioning to you offline that I recently reconnected with a good friend of my childhood who happens to be, a law graduate from Georgetown, has a doctorate degree in law. She stopped practicing law to become a teacher because that was her passion. And she was telling me that the goal of the Department of Education in the United States is essentially to make high school graduates think like seventh graders. In other words, to take critical thinking, to limit verbal and written and writing skills. Do you think this is part of the problem?
Very, very much. And I see more of a need for education now than ever. Not our public fool system, as I've heard people call it, but true education. It doesn't necessarily come in a mass production line type of situation. Matter of fact, it's best if it doesn't.
$500,000 tons, 110 floors vanished into dust, leaving a small rubble pile no higher than the lobby.
I was reading a Swedish article with a Google translator recently, and I thought it was a beautiful statement. They're writing up about my work, and they said, there is no need for another conspiracy than the one that destroyed the educational system.
That's very powerful.
Very, very. And look what happened. Imagine this. The buildings turned to dust. They didn't burn up. They didn't slam to the ground. They turned to dust in midair. We know that because of lots of key features: lack of significant seismic signal, lack of a seismic signal that traveled through the earth. There wasn't one. And lack of damage to the bathtub. And we saw there was very little rubble left over. And we saw the steel turning to dust as it fell, trailing dust. So here was these huge buildings that turned to dust in midair right in front of our faces on TV. Why did so few people see it? That's the question we should all be asking.